Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Jonathan Project Podcast, where iron is sharpening iron, and we help men navigate the complexities of the world around them. We take the inspiration for this podcast from Jonathan and his friend and future King David as the inspiration. If you would like Jason and me to come out and speak to you at a men's event, schools, if you have something going on and you found inspiration from this podcast, please reach out to us at thejonathanprojectpodcast@gmail.com. Again, thejonathanprojectpodcast@gmail.com. Jason, how are you doing today?
Hey, so for all of you listeners out there, we had to do a couple of retakes. Apparently, there was some comedy.
Yes, there was. Jason's trying to be a funny man today.
Well, it is. So all's good. All is good here today. I had a great conversation with Sam, one of our listeners.
Yeah.
Talked to Tyson as well. I think they're in a running tally who talks to who or something. I'm not really sure. But good people. And all's been good. Let's talk here. You have a monumental event that just occurred. Tell me about it. Tell us about it.
As Jason's put me on the spot, he loves to do this. So, for everyone that's been listening over the last few seasons, and I think about Sam and a couple other folks out there that have been turned on to the Rapture series, 5.5 years in the making. It came to a close late last night.
Oh, wow.
Right to my editor, Kelly's appreciation, I'm sure. So I wrapped up the final book, which is titled King of Kings and in Jesus' Glorious Return. So that'll be out Easter weekend, God willing, and nobody on the production side of the house gets sick or something like that happens. But yeah, so it was hard. It was like saying goodbye to some old friends, but we'll move on to the next writing project here shortly. But yeah.
And just like true brothers, Colby called me yesterday and told me about it. And I said, this is extremely awkward, and made him feel awkward about it. No, really super proud of you, man. That's 5 years in the making.
I know.
I love those books. Straight up, did you shut the lights off on this one?
Oh, well, I had to. I mean, the party's over. It's not giving away the ending. If you ever read the Bible, Jesus comes back, we win. That's kind of how the party ends. But,
That's how it ends. Awesome.
Yeah. So what else is going on with you? I know you've had some adventures in chicken herding.
Oh man, the chickens are always out there. They literally, I went and let them out this morning. 3 of them flew over the fence. They're in the yard. Whatever.
You should have a reality show about these chickens. I'm telling you.
Yeah. You know what? There's a reality show about Bigfoot. There's a reality show about everything.
Yeah.
My 600-pound life. I mean, there's reality shows on here.
Yeah.
Could be one on chickens. You never know.
It could be. Chickens in Alabama. There you go.
Yeah. So for everybody out there and listening to this comedy, on a serious note, we did our devotion. It's out there.
Yeah, it is.
The
awesome.
Jonathan Project devotional. It is out there. It's on Colby's website, and we'll include a link for that. It is free 99. So go get it.
Yep.
It's 100% free. It's a good deal. Starts out laying that foundation of, your relationship with Jesus Christ. It's the foundation week, and then it moves into loving others as much as you love yourself. And it talks about, we took 1 Corinthians chapter 13 about love, and we said, hey, this is what love is. We did that for a couple of days. You get that, and then you move into servant leadership, about how to be a good leader in your family. And then we move into, in the last couple of weeks, about what does your ministry look like, growing others and investing in them. So it's 28 days. Takes about 2.5, 3 minutes to read, and hopefully you find some inspiration from it. But it's out there. It's free.
No, that was awesome. And,
along with
Jason,
there's some coffee cups out there if you guys want one.
They are, and those are on the website as well.
They're not free, but they're out there.
We couldn't make those free 99, but they are cheaper than a Starbucks little mug thing that I've seen my wife buy before, which I don't. I guess those are like collector's items, but that's a whole nother.
Are they?
I think so, because you go to different places and they have like little designs and and she had the Bible on because, yeah.
It's there. Well, all right.
Yeah. So, anywho, moving right along.
Moving along.
What are we going to talk about this week? What are we going to talk
Staying
about?
the course.
Staying the course,
Yeah.
consistency, right?
Consistency. One of my favorite things is,
Yeah.
like when I train muscular endurance, stay
Yeah.
at it. So kind of how do you do that in a spiritual thing?
But consistency, and the other part of that, the other side of that coin, if you would, is what obedience. Because consistency goes right hand in hand with being obedient. And we're going to kind of dive into probably one of the best examples in my mind of a man in the Bible who had it all, was set up, and just couldn't be consistent and or obedient. And I know Jason's going to pull some nuggets as well. So, Jason, take us away on this discussion.
No, you did it. It's as Saul. So lead off, and I'm going to follow you on that one. I love it.
Yeah, so I think we've all been there, right? And Jason, I'm gonna throw him under the bus like he does me, throwing in like what's going on. We had a really great meeting that kind of spurred off with Moody, and there's some stuff that's still developing with them, and we're just excited and humbled by that opportunity, whatever it may come. But the point, and Jason brought this up in the meeting with Moody, was what we try to do every week here at the Jonathan Project podcast is just be consistent and being obedient to what God has kind of put onto our hearts as two friends and brothers in Christ. And that's what we have. But when you look at now from a biblical kind of understanding, Saul was chosen by the people because he had looked the part.
Mm-hmm.
And God kind of gave him the heads up like, hey, might not be what you want. And they went ahead and went down the path. And not to give the ending away, but Saul ended up getting his kingdom stripped from him. And ironically enough, his son, who this podcast is titled after, would have been a fine king. He was everything that his father wasn't. He was consistent and he was obedient. He showed up for David. He showed up for his family. Even though his dad was completely off the rails, he was there for him, and that's why he lost his life. So there are downstream effects when we as men, the leaders, the upfront folks, get off the tracks and you become inconsistent and you most definitely become disobedient. There's going to be ramifications.
Yeah. When Saul was very tall, right? He was very good looking. He was very shy. As a matter of fact, he was counted amongst the prophets. Mm-hmm. So he was on that right trajectory. He looked right. He smelled right and everything else. Well, I don't know. They didn't have that body. You know what I mean? It looks right, smells right, things moves forward. Yeah. Not literally.
Come on, man. Yeah, go ahead.
But he did. And when the pressure hit him, though, he was very concerned with what people thought. And that was a big deal to him. I couldn't wait on you to make the sacrifice. And that was kind of like the straw that broke the camel's back, right? And he constantly, he was in there, and then you could see his temper begin to take over, right? When the pressure hit, what was he like? And pressure's coming for everybody, right? Being consistent and staying the course. I thought about this when we talk about pressure comes on everybody, and do you stay the course? You looked up Saul, and I immediately thought about Joshua, right?
Joshua had a good example as well, yeah.
Well, he had a tall, and he's a successful story. He think about that. He falls in behind Moses, right? Of all the leaders of all the shoes you're gonna fill, you're falling in right behind Moses. Now, this is the guy that talks to God face to face. He's remembered as a friend of God. Oh, he parted the Red Sea. Well, God parted it through him, and he's the leader. And oh, by the way, when there was a contesting of who was going to be in charge, God says, you go ahead and tell them to stand on that side of the line. I'm going to draw a line right here. I'm going to stand on this side and let the votes begin. And the earth opened up and swallowed them. So Moses was in charge, and then there's Joshua. And I love the phrase, be strong and of good courage. Mm-hmm. And Joshua showed up every day. Like that's really a superpower, just showing up every day.
That's right? 90% of the fight, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think about one of my favorite verses, Proverbs 3, 5, and 6, as that foundation for the discussion, right? Is, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways, acknowledge him, and he shall direct your paths, right? That showing up. And he did that for Joshua. That is he showed up for Joshua and he guided him on that path. I love that.
Well, and when you see the examples in the Bible of being consistent, of just showing up, Colby, I'm going to tell you the only God-given talent that I have is I'll show up every day. That's the truth, right? Think about, and there's a guy listening, Pat, right? And so Pat and Mike set me up years ago. We were all in the unit together and everything. Mm-hmm. And I thought it was a 5K race. I really did. And I didn't like running. I was kind of doing these sprint things and kind of lifting, and which I still do, more lifting, less sprinting. Anyway, turns out it wasn't. It was a 50K. And I'm like, they don't make a 50K. Well, they sure do.
Oh, they do.
Yeah, I didn't know that. I'm like, whatever. So
you're going to learn today, though.
Oh, I did. It was an ice storm. My wife was very quick to point out that people trained for it. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not real happy, but I'm going to show up. So I showed up. They made trail running shoes. I didn't know that back then. I just showed up in some gym shoes.
I bet you did, Slick. I bet you did.
I did. As Pat said, he goes, you look like you're getting ready to go deadlift. I'm like, yeah. Showed up drinking a cup of coffee. Everybody's stretching, doing all their thing, warming up, got their bottles of water. I'm like drinking a cup of coffee and I'm not real happy. And to Pat's character, he stayed with me the whole run. And it was like some 8 hours later, But luckily they did have stops on the way that they'd feed you peanut butter sandwiches. And the fat kid here loved the peanut butter sandwiches. So it was like a run to a goal, eat, and kind of move on. But just showing up. And as a result of that, showing up, it was a great experience, me and a friend. And it's one of the funnier stories that I have of my stupidity. I did finish. I got a t-shirt.
Yeah. But, it's relatable, right? Because I think all of us have at some point struggled with being consistent, yes, in physical attributes, like how many people are still on track with their resolutions, if you're a resolution kind of person. Like here in February 15th, as we're recording this. But, what are those obstacles that kind of keep you from, being obedient to God and getting off track? Yeah. I think we should sometimes, just as much as, like you said, I just have to show up. And yeah. He talks about this. The Bible talks about this, where it's like you have to die to yourself daily. You have to put yourself under that submission and that discipline to be able to be an effective husband, father, son, whatever you are. You have to. And you have to show up, and that can be tough.
It can be. And you hit the nail on the head. You die daily. It would be easy if you just died once. Yeah. God calls us to die daily.
Yes.
Super hard. And for dads out there, for husbands, I want you to go through this percentage. If a child comes to know Jesus Christ, only the child in the family, there's probably about a 20% chance. I think the statistics are 20% the family will come to know Jesus. Mm-hmm. And if it's the mom, it's like maybe up to 30 to 40. But if a dad comes to know Jesus Christ, and he is a Christian in that family, there's a 90-something% chance the rest of your family will come to know Christ as well. Yeah. So when you think, man, this isn't, I'm tired, Jesus, I'm getting beat up or whatever, and you're kind of crying, just remember that 90-something%. You're it.
Yeah.
Right? Look at Noah. One of our favorite side discussions, by the way, if you don't know this. Noah, pretty consistent, showed up every day to build the ark.
Yes, he did.
I believe it talks about people asking what in the world. And he stayed this course building this ark. And I can't remember if people kind of asked him. I can't remember what it said.
No, I think that's kind of the blending of our side stories and us saying, I can only imagine every day when he came back to Mrs. Noah and she's like, went to the grocery store or whatever they did. And they're like, your husband is slap crazy. You know that, right?
He's out there building a boat on land, right? In the big one.
But these are the kind of conversations me and Jason have.
But think about his consistency, right? And he built the ark. Yeah. And so there it was. And also, by the way, for our listeners, if you read that story, and I love that story, it's a great one to read to your kids. And you always get to have the boat and the bathtub, and you can kind of have the little animals if you got little kids. And but it says God's hand closed that door, because I bet there were some conversations right afterwards of, well, there's Sally out there, and she ain't gonna be able to tread water for a long time. Things like that. But Noah was consistent. And
Yes,
he
he
showed up
was,
every day.
Jason. And consistency, staying on that theme and getting away from Noah and his conversation with Mrs. Noah, consistency is important for a man in his faith, right? And there's a couple reasons.
Mm-hmm.
One, it's going to kind of deepen that relationship with God. It helps you move towards having a steadfast commitment, which the opposite side of consistency is really obedient. You're building that trust, having a regular prayer, scripture study, obedience, building those habits.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Those practical ways that you can become more consistent in obedience, and allows you to experience that closer connection with God. I think, I remember for the longest time, asking people, like, how do you hear God's voice? I hear people, you go to church, you hear, they're like, oh, I heard, God's voice. And I had an older gentleman tell me, he's like, well, you start by reading the Bible. He was like, that's his words. And when you start doing that consistently, it's amazing how you stop hearing a lot of other noise. So being consistent is really important if you want to build your faith, not only as a man, but for any Christian out there listening, right?
Mm-hmm. No, so as I was sitting there thinking about it, and Paul talks about it to the church of Corinth, right? And if you ever want to see or read about, the church of Corinth had a lot of problems.
Just a few.
They were the A&E reality of the biblical time. They just were, right? It was a lot of crazy going on. But Paul looks at them in First Corinthians, and he says, "Therefore, my beloved brethren, be steadfast, unmovable, always abounding in the work of the Lord, for as much as ye know that your labor is not in vain in the Lord." I think that's a big deal. Sometimes we feel like our labor is in vain, but we're sowing. God uses that in agricultural metaphors. And I love that, because agriculture was the same 2,000 years ago as it is today. Put the seed in the ground, good soil, water it, harvest the crop. But that's it, right? Like, sometimes we can get discouraged. And sometimes as men, I've heard this, I've been married for 20 something years. Sometimes my wife just needs me to listen. And I'm like, sometimes we just need a solution. You think we need to listen, but I think we need to just get a solution. And that's everybody. Listen, if you're laughing at this, don't wreck in the car. But you know it and I know it. But the truth is as a guy or as someone, you gotta step out from the fray of things to be consistent. Sometimes it's easy to get discouraged and disheartened when you're in the fray of it. There's actually a term called get to the balcony. And, the way it was described is like, if you want to know what's going on like this giant dance floor of all these moving people, you have to get to the balcony and remove yourself from it to be able to see. Yeah. Because when you're down there, you're kind of caught up.
Yeah.
And that can help you keep that goal in mind, right? And be steadfast and consistent.
Yes.
Trials are going to come, but seeing them through, when you looked at Saul and all the things and how he was constantly just falling and and he missed the mark a couple of times. No, but he missed the mark. God rejects him, right? Like, at some point he goes, "Hey, I'm done." I think it was, when was the actual rebuking? What was the event? Do you remember that?
I'm trying to see. Well, I mean, that's a good segue kind of into the thought that kind of pops into my mind, and I think I covered it in the notes, but we'll see. If not, we can circle back. Is there's a cost to disobedience, right? And there is that tragedy that comes from examining Saul's life and that cost of his disobedience and inconsistency. For example, partial obedience, where Samuel has told him, the Lord has sent the message, hey, kill everything, the Amalekites, kill all the goats, chickens, everything's got to go, right? Closing up business kind of sell. And Saul chooses in that moment to say, hey, I'm going to keep the best, right? And I think initially in his heart, maybe it was like, hey, I want to have a sacrifice for the Lord. But partial obedience guess what? In God's eyes, it's still disobedience, and his defiance cost him his throne and ultimately his legacy as he went down this road time and time again.
Mm-hmm.
We see, 1 Samuel 15-22, it talks about it's better to obey than for sacrifice. It's what Samuel come back and condemns him. And then 1 Samuel 13-13-14, he's like, you have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord. Now your kingdom shall not continue. This is where he strips him away
Yeah.
of the kingdom. And basically what had happened was Saul was not doing the right thing. His son is out, Jonathan's out at war, and he's doing his own thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, he took away a legacy and the line away from his son. Think about that as a man. You can do something. And we see this all the time in the world where a father gets caught up in some kind of scandal and destroys the whole family and future generations. And you take something away just out of simple disobedience. So it's a powerful lesson. There is a cost. It can be a small thing, but you are being disobedient. There's a cost to that.
No, as a matter of fact, it's the king of the Amalekites, Agag, that's left, right?
Mm-hmm.
And when he's there, he, it's like, oh, okay, here's Agag. But it's interesting because when you look later down the road in Esther 3, I think it's 3:1, or it's in the 3rd chapter.
Yeah.
But it talks about Haman. And he's an Amalekite. He came from Agag. Like, he was left. And if you got, everybody remembers, Haman had the plot to kill all the Jews at one time. And he had convinced the king this is what was going to happen. And he had built those gallows out there for Mordecai. And, Esther came in and intervened, right? So when we're not obedient and we don't show up, we plant seeds for Christ. We plant seeds in everything we do, but also Satan plants seeds too.
Yeah.
Right. Like there's the wheat and the tares, right? It's all that agricultural thing. Yeah. And that's kind of like in our lives. I think there's that dual reference, right?
No, you're right.
You can plant some bad seeds that show up later.
No, you're right. And that's kind of some of these things, like the lessons that we can take away, those costs that were imposed on Saul's family and future generations. Disobedience has consequences. It affects your family, your leadership in those future generations. True success is rooted in obedience. Talent, your intelligence, your resources, your charisma is not enough. Proverbs 9:10 says, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Mm-hmm. Pride leads to destruction. The moment we think we don't need God, you're in trouble. Proverbs 16:18, pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. Comparison and jealousy. There's a whole couple episodes on how Saul turned his attention as things were stripped away from him. He went crazy towards David. Mm-hmm. Saul's envy of David blinded him to his own purpose of what God had called him to. But let's think about it in the modern world. How easy is it to start comparing yourself to another man, another family, another woman out there, for all our female listeners out there? It's easy to get caught up in that comparison game, but remember what God called you to and your purpose and stay on that track.
Yeah. So think about this call to purpose and being consistent. And with Jonathan, so when Saul is killed, right, and David's king, Mephibosheth is Jonathan's son. And the lady, I think, they've kind of figured out that his nursemaid must have picked him up and was running with him, and he fell, right? And so he was kind of broken. But Jonathan was consistent in being David's friend. This is it, right? So what happens? David seeks out Mephibosheth, and he brings him, and it's a great example of what Christ does for us and our brokenness. He brings him to the table, says, you're going to eat at my table every day. And it didn't have anything to do with Mephibosheth. It had to do with Jonathan, right?
Yep.
So those seeds come out. Think about this on being consistent. There's a whole lot of people that are friends of friends. And if you're listening to this, I bet, I know a lot of you. Colby knows a lot of you. And friends of friends, right? And we extend that grace throughout. Like we plant those seeds of being consistently good friends to one another. When you are consistently show up every day for Bible study or prayer life. It's like going to the gym every day, right? You're gonna get some benefit.
Yes, sir.
That's the truth. It's what it takes. Be consistent because the fight's consistent, right?
No, I love that. I love it. And, as I think about like kind of final little thoughts that I had taken from my notes and research, and you segued it well, is the seeds, right? What are you planting? Because the fruits of disobedience, they're small little seeds that you don't even realize that you've planted until it's harvest time. And there's 6 of them that I pulled out of the story that show up in my life, Jason's life, everybody's life, that if you're not careful, you see these manifested in Saul and they can lead to destruction. Impatience. How often, as me and Jason have both talked about some of our professional civilian struggles, have I wanted to rush ahead? But when you rush ahead of God, you can find yourself absolutely outside of his will. And that is one of the most, that is the most dangerous thing you can ever do in your life, is be outside of God's will.
Mm-hmm.
Saul not waiting for Samuel, in 1 Samuel 13, 8 through 13, you see what that led to. Defiance is another seed. Obeying part of God's commands is still disobedience. Saul, thought keeping what seemed value instead of full obedience of what God told him in 1 Samuel 15 and 19, it cost him greatly. Deceit. Saying we're obedient when our actions prove otherwise. You're not lying to the king, you're only lying to yourself. Saul claimed that he had obeyed while keeping the livestock. Excuses. Blaming others instead of taking responsibility. This is a big one nowadays. Accountability. You have to, as a guy, as the leader, the buck stops with you. Saul blaming the people for his own disobedience. We see that in 1 Samuel 15 and 15. Pride. That's what led Satan to his downfall, and we see it manifest in our lives at times and with Saul. Seeking self-glory instead of honoring God. Saul built a monument to himself. That's not good for the home team. Rebellion. Choosing personal desires over God's commands. We saw this. Saul was rejecting God's way, and ultimately, folks, that's what it boils down to, rebellion. Mm-hmm. When we choose our way, I don't care what it is, you are rebelling against the creator of everything, and you will lose that fight 10 times out of 10. And he will get you back on track if your heart is willing to. But rebellion is a big thing, that we plant that little seed and then it harvests into something we just don't want.
You said something that I really did like. Saul built a monument to himself. How many guys build monuments to themselves? We do, right? And that is not what you want. What you want is you want your family to have that relationship with Jesus. The most important thing in your life is your relationship with Jesus. The most important thing in their life is their relationship with Jesus. That's the truth. And I think about that. I think, it's not how great I am, it's how great he is. That's what we need for our family. And when we talk about consistently pushing forward and dying to self, that's it. If you're willing to sacrifice yourself continually, you don't build altars. You don't build monuments to yourself.
I love that.
That's what I mean, right? Because that's it. You keep putting Christ first. So,
no, that's great, Jason, and I'll take that as the final thoughts as we come to our kind of tiered mark here. But, again, guys, and everyone out there listening to us this morning, as you drive in or wherever you may be, it's important to be consistent, building those spiritual muscles, as Jason talked about, each and every day, and then being obedient. There is no half obedience. There's no, I'm obedient in this area of my life, I'm not obedient over here. You have to be consistent and obedient. And so, well, that is another episode of the Jonathan Project Podcast. And if you want to hear this episode and any episode, they come out every Tuesday on your favorite podcast platforms. That could be iHeartRadio, Spotify, Apple, Amazon Music, you name it. You're going to find the Jonathan Project Podcast there. If you want us to come out, speak to you again at a speaking engagement that you have for men, families, whatever it may be, please reach out to us at the Jonathan Project Podcast at gmail.com. Again, the Jonathan Project Podcast at gmail.com. Please go to TikTok, find the Jonathan Project Podcast, look for our shorts, previews that we put on there, different kind of content to try to reach you. And we are going to have an episode of Jonathan's Leftovers. There's a couple things that we couldn't fit into this timeline that we'd love to come back every Wednesday morning, 6 a.m., same podcast platforms. And we give you a few extra nuggets of just practical advice on being consistent and obedient for this week. On behalf of Jason, thanks. And we will see you guys again next week.
See ya.